Greetings everyone at home. Good evening, Alisha. And just a warm welcome to all who've joined us virtually from coast to coast to coast and hopefully from around the world. As you know, the Union of National Employees is proud to represent members both nationally and internationally. And we are especially grateful to have extended this invitation to our union siblings and beyond. Today's discussion on workforce adjustment, so WFA, is a crucial one, as it has the potential to impact not only us as individuals, but also our loved ones. So my name is Bernadette Becci. I'm a mother, a partner, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a PhD candidate, and a human rights activist. I'm honored to serve others in my role at the Union of National Employees, advocating for and supporting our members. So before we get started, I would like to start by acknowledging and honoring my ancestors for paving the way for me and for others, for allowing me to rest on their shoulders when strength is depleted. Thank you for being here, Alisha, and I look forward to our discussion. Alors, en ce mois de l'histoire.
During this Black History Month, we're taking a moment to honor the contributions of our African ancestors who created this society, our struggles, and our collective fight. We must continue to fight for equity and justice. So I'd like to read the land acknowledgement for people with a Black history. As people who have Black ancestors, we offer this land acknowledgement in solidarity with the native peoples of Turtle Island. We recognize this land as Turtle Island, and we recognize that most of the land given to the indigenous people were given by choice and very often was taken by force. We also recognize the historic colonialism, and the colonialism now in place has created the situation we live in where land acknowledgement is given instead of giving the land. As a person with Black ancestors, many of us came here by choice, and many are here because of historic reasons. We understand the complexity. We were offered a land that was never given. As a person with African ancestors, we recognize the land of Turtle Island that supports us. We express our gratitude towards the native peoples, and we promise to maintain our links between all of us. Personally, this land acknowledgement allows me to reconnect with my African roots and my role as a member of a community where everything I do has an impact on other people. So I'd invite you to take a moment to reflect on the importance of these words and your personal commitments. So before I introduce our special guest tonight, I would like to remind you that we have simultaneous interpretation tonight in both French and English, and that this event is being recorded so that you can share it with your colleagues and our members, and you can review it. So this event is being recorded to allow you to view it later. So I'd like to introduce now Alisha Kang. Now, Alisha is a proud mother of her son, Gael, who's a young activist who's 22 years old, who's studying law, and her daughter, Kiro, who's 26, a scientist on the autism spectrum. In May 2024, she became a candidate to become president of PSAC. She wanted to allow strong conventions, and she wanted to defend a one-member vote. In August 2023, she was elected president of Union of National Employees, UNE, which is made up of more than 27,000 members from sea to sea and is composed of 80 collective agreements. Since she has arrived as president of UNE, here are a few things I'd like to identify as things she has done.
Out of trusteeship, I think it's been a year from now, a little bit over a year, just almost a year from now. She has completed her Nelly certification through the Cornell program. And she also attended the working group for people of African descent at the United Nations. I think these are important things to highlight and great accomplishment for the organization. So I think I'm going to turn the mic to you, Alisha, since we have a full evening full of questions, and I think people are really here to hear about what is WFA and ask their questions. So I'm going to turn the mic to you. Welcome. Ashe.
So one of the reasons I thought it was important that we get together is that obviously the news, is out there that many of the departments that our members are located in as employees are facing workforce adjustment. And some of them are even facing what is also known as SURLO. And the process, at least when I went through it in 2012, seemed very mystical and confusing and stressful, absolutely stressful, because you were hearing rumors in the workplace and rumors in the union, and you weren't really sure of what was really happening. You'd get these periodic updates, but you didn't really know if it would affect you or impact your family. And I know in my own situation, I felt like there wasn't really any information out there. There were the booklets, but I have to say, when you're in a time of extreme stress, it's actually difficult to internalize information as it's coming at you, because you're trying to maintain your ability to produce at the highest efficiency, because you're like, now are they looking at everything I'm doing, and is this going to put me at risk of being one of the people who's actually going to be workforce adjusted? And at the same time, your coworkers are all stressed about the same thing. And so it creates a bit of a strange storm in the workplace of uncertainty, stress, and anxiety. And I think what I really wanted is that the members did not go through that same situation this time again. And so I really wanted to bring a more trauma-informed, a more compassion-informed process. And it doesn't mean that this is going to make it easier, but at least you'll have the information that will empower you through this process, because that was the one thing that I felt was lacking. I did not feel empowered as an employee to understand my rights through the workforce adjustment, and I didn't feel like I even knew what the right questions to ask in the workplace as I was being presented this information. And so I thought it would be a good time to get together, especially with everything that's going on and some of the concerns that are out there, and for us to kind of discuss what WFA is. So I kind of want to back up. I really want us to think about how there's been a sort of belief that once you get into the government, you kind of, once you're indeterminate, you have that job, that you're protected. And I think that has been a dangerous message that's been put out there, because I would say that the government of Canada is actually one of the worst in terms of precarious work situations. And what I mean by that is many of our members are terms, and they're waiting for that 3 years. It's like they dangle this, I'm going to renew your contract for 6 months, or and you're always hoping that you get to that 3-year mark so that you roll over into indeterminate, because that feels a lot safer. And in some ways it can be, but it's not necessarily. And I think that that is some of the things that we have to demystify for people, is that yes, terms are usually always the first to be, basically their terms are ended. They're given a firm date that their terms will end, and they leave the organization. With the indeterminate employees, what happens is that you're notified that the workforce adjustment or the WFA process is underway. So usually the employer has to come to the bargaining agent, and just to make some separation, the bargaining agent is actually the PSAC. They're the ones who negotiate the contracts for the members. UNE actually is the one that is to protect members and their rights in the workplace. So we need a bit of separation between that. There's other nuances, but that's sort of the high level sort of separation. And so what happens is, when a workforce adjustment process starts, the employer notifies the bargaining unit, which is either PSAC, and PSAC notifies us, or they notify both of us at the same time. And then once that happens, what we're supposed to do is start to work on getting the committees together. And the committees are supposed to review the number of positions that are either being removed because they believe they don't need those positions anymore. They're going to go in a different direction to actually deliver those services. Or they're saying we need to reduce the workforce because of budgetary reasons. And so in the situation where you're looking at budgetary cuts, it doesn't mean that that job was not needed in the organization anymore. It's that the organization has decided that though we need that position, we cannot meet our fiscal responsibilities within the budget that we're being given moving forward, and so we have to reduce the amount of staff that we have. And that usually looks like the organization deciding that out of the services we're providing, we're gonna reduce these services in these ways, right? And so then they come to us with a number of how many positions and where, and then we have to determine who. And so that's really what the WFA process looks like. If it's done as outlined in the documentation that we have in the collective agreements. And so you can expect that there's going to be communication from the employer as we move through this, but I also would expect that the union should also be providing updates as they're working through the process. And this is one of the reasons why the town hall was called, is I wanted to update sort of where we are with who at this time, and where they can find more information. So the other thing is that the workforce adjustment guide that was created by the PSAC is on their website, and it's a good place to start to figure out what kind of questions you may have when the employer is talking to you, in which way it's going to impact you. What would it look like if you were leaving? And what services are going to be available? And who's going to support you through this process? Well, from my perspective, we also have a role as the union to support you through this process. Not because you're being terminated does that mean that you haven't, contributed to the union and supported the union. And so I think this is one of the times at which we need to be present, asking questions, and asking some of the questions that you may not consider to ask as you go through this process. So I just kind of wanted to give an overview of the process before we kind of jump into questions.
Thank you so much, because I think it will allow folks who maybe don't know much about WFA and are starting kind of experiencing this for the first time, and even if it's not the first time experiencing this, having the reminder and coming from maybe someone else's perspective and having that explanation might help you maybe feel more empowered, right, in knowing what's coming and what is this whole thing called WFA. So we have received a few questions in advance, and thank you so much for sending them. We were able to compile them, and so we're going to go through those questions first, and hopefully we can give you fulsome answers. And then after that, with the time that we have, we'll go to folks at home. You will be able to raise your hand and ask your question in this live, in this town hall. And we are also going to do our best to answer the question, answer your question. I apologize for that. So let me get started with the first question that we have here, and turn it to Alisha to answer. So we were asked, what type of support can locals expect from UNE in order to be able to support members? They're asking here for concrete items.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is a great question, because I have to say, like, when my own WFA situation happened, I turned to the local and I wasn't quite sure what kind of information they had. And so this is one of the reasons why I wanted to get back to focusing on members, is that from my perspective, the locals are the closest contact that a member can have with the organization. And so in terms of what we're trying to do, one of the requests that I put forward to the employer is that we actually have some mental health providers available at the time that the letters are delivered. When my letter was delivered to me in 2012, I was called into an office. I was given a letter and told to go home. And I didn't have any contact. So some of the stuff that we're going to develop is obviously we're going to do our own version of the workforce adjustment book to send out to the local with some updates of things that we think are important. But I think from my perspective, the locals in this situation are kind of not really the go-to person. And so oftentimes the local is the go-to person. But in this case, I would say that more often than not, your best contact is going to be your regional contact, because they're going to be getting information from all of the locals and getting a sense of what the temperature is in different places. So I would really recommend that members reach out to the regional RVPs and to the national organization. And that's because we can field those questions and actually put Q&As on the website. That's not something that the local can do. And oftentimes, the unfortunate thing that happens is that the locals are sometimes asked by the employer to give sort of an opinion or consultation on what's going on with the WFA, and they're entering themselves into a liability situation. And really what we need is the appointed individuals from national to be feeding into national, and then what we're going to do is disseminate sort of a newsletter or some updates through the locals, so that for members who are not participating or are not getting all the fielded questions, they're going to get sort of a summation of what we're getting at the national level. So I think usually this is really a place where I see the locals playing a strong, relationship with the members. But in a WFA situation, it is really at a national level. We're dealing with the PSAC, we're dealing with the regional vice presidents, we're dealing with the national officers who are getting information from the deputy ministers or the presidents or the CEOs of the organizations. And so I think the best that we can do on a local level is really be there to support the members and field up the questions upwards, right? Because a lot of times there may be complexity and nuance to the issue that the member is raising that we have details on that we cannot share yet with the local, and we can support as we go through. But what we really want to do is keep the locals as informed as possible as we become informed, so that they can answer questions. What I would like is if the locals can ensure that they're meeting with members on a more regular basis, because they may not be getting questions, and they may not be reaching out to members of the local, but to give them those instances where they get together may trigger a question because they've heard another question from a different member of their local. So I would say that in any way that we can support the locals to get together with other members of the local because as we know, the rumor mills are rampant at these times. And if we can ensure that people are meeting on a regular basis and they're getting the updates that we're providing to the locals moving forward, I think that that's the best way we can support the members from a local perspective.
I hope you're taking notes at home, because these are very important as you go through your journey, or you might be helping someone else that will be affected by this. And I find, like Alisha said at the beginning, I find that when we are experiencing trauma, we are not always thinking clearly. So making sure we take notes now and refer to them as we go through this process. So the second question here is, there are many of us seniors who are delaying retirement due to the high cost of living. Instead of the many planned layoffs from federal government jobs, why doesn't the government offer an incentive package to those contemplating retirement? This voluntary package would save some jobs for our younger folks in public service.
That's a great question. And I think, this is the part where our social views actually impact labor, right? Because the truth is that society-wide, we have a disproportionate amount of people who have views of people who work as public service workers, that they have high-paying jobs, that they're living fat off, the revenues of tax. And the unfortunate thing is, as that's being fueled in society, there's a feeling that why should they also get a golden handshake at the end of this, right? So governments don't want to touch this because of the political ramifications of actually buying out people with what they used to call like the golden handshake, right? And so they've stopped doing that because there was so much blowback in the media for the government doing that, that they thought, you know what, we're better off just being the bad guys. And this is where, unionism and activism and politics all sort of come together in society. And they can't be unintertwined. That's the thing. Like, we want to think like it doesn't matter how I vote at the end of the day, because, this is not going to impact me. The unfortunate thing, and, I didn't learn this until 2012, so I'm not casting stones from a place where I haven't learned this lesson myself, is that in 2012, the government of the day decided it was going to completely, basically gut the public service workers. And there were no offers of voluntary packages. There hadn't been since the 80s, right? And I think that we, as a society, need to value the benefits of people who are retired and contributing to society, but we don't have that value towards people who retire. I mean, I saw a frightening statistic that was like something like 60% of people die within 5 years of retirement. People are having to work way too long and are spending very little time actually retired. And you have to think about it this way. It's kind of a numbers game, if that's the case. Because the government can just wait for people to push themselves so far to retire so late that they're barely ever going to have to pay them a pension. And I find that extremely cruel and unconsiderate of everything those individuals have contributed to society and to other Canadians by being, public service workers. I think you're not really going to see a return to that until society has a return to a more social net mindset. And, right now, people are being, they're being glorified, they're being, idolized for being cruel. And I think that you're seeing this play out in workers' lives, right? In a real concrete way, when people cannot get a, if you're within 5 years of retirement, or here's an incentive to retire, it's like, no, please get out, right? It is a completely different mindset. And I think that until we shift that mindset on a kind of more global perspective, we're not going to see a return to the, the kinder way of helping people exit their workplace.
Je pense que malheureusement, c'est une réflexion, comme tu disais, de notre société.
As you were saying, it's a reflection of society. A society that doesn't know how to really take proper care of their elders. We expect these elders to work and build our country, after which we abandon them when we need us the most, when they're at their most vulnerable. So it's unfortunately the stage at which society is in. Let me move on to the third question, which asks,
to get back to passport so I could stay in our component and work with our members, colleagues, and leadership. Are there any ways to affect WFA placements with the employer that will take into consideration our component membership, alliance, and or elected positions?
Unfortunately, no. At the end of the day, and I guess the way I would put it is this way: what we really want for it to be an equitable process, right, is that when we understand there's going to be a reduction in positions, we want it to be equitable and we want it to be fair. And if we did it by allegiance, we would be as guilty as the employer of, selecting people based on their allegiance. And that's not the kind of organization we would want to be, right? We want to make sure that I'm going to just be very straight. We obviously do not want any reduction in our members. And we are going to continue to raise that because we already feel like we are not providing the services that Canadians need. We're overworked. Many of us are doing multiple, when I was in the government, I felt like I was doing 3 people's job. And, we needed more people, not less people. Mm-hmm. And so the reduction in services that we're going to see from this is not going to just impact the members. It is going to impact Canadians, right? When they go to get their services, and specifically talk a passport, I mean, the lineups are still there, right? And so we don't need a reduction in people actually processing passports and supporting Canadians. The population has grown. If anything, we should be looking at the proportionate number of people we need working in that industry, not doing it based on budgetary constraints, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not how we're operating. And so, from my perspective, any job loss that is a unionized job is a detriment to the Canadian economy, right? Because good unionized jobs ensure that people are fed. They don't have to go to the food bank because they don't have to carry multiple jobs, right? They have access to the things that they need for their family, mm-hmm. and they can be contributing members of the economy because they have money to go and spend and support local businesses. Mm-hmm. But, as we become less and less important, or as they try to squeeze less and less unionized jobs, what happens is that, employers are making sure you don't have benefits. So you can't get, physio. And so you have more days of absentee. It's all in, globally connected in how this happens. And so unfortunately, we couldn't conduct ourselves like the employer in the way that we could not be selective and say, well, this person is aligned to our organization, so we want to keep them, and that person's not, so we don't want them to stay. We really have to look at what are the impacts to Canadians, what services would they lose, and which positions do we reduce. And again, I'll say it again, we don't want any of your jobs to leave. And this is why it's so important to be involved, because unfortunately, there were battles going on all the way till we got to the WFA situation, right? But oftentimes you don't know you're in a war until the final battle comes, right? And then you realize, oh no, wait, now my job's at risk? No, I thought it was other people who were at risk, right? But all along we were trying to maintain the collective agreement, right? We were trying to maintain the rights in the workplace. All of those things impact how we get here. Because if we don't turn out, you know, when we're going to get a new collective agreement, because we want stronger language on how we reduce jobs. If you don't show up on the strike line, we have no hope of getting that stronger language. And I say, you know, the battle is every day in this work for labor rights, right? And I know that sounds sort of, you know, it sounds fanatical, but the truth is that every day somebody's rights are infringed on, and we don't actually protect the collective agreement. It's just another reason the government to say, I don't have to follow the Surlo process. Because what are they going to do anyways? They're going to do nothing about it, right? And so when the government knows that workers are not going to be pushed around anymore, they're going to have to listen. So those are kind of some of my comments on that one.
No, they're great comments. Thank you so much. Following that question, someone is asking that they're saying that they're currently on leave without pay for family caregiving. How does this affect my job security?
Well, the first thing is that if this does impact your job security, it's discrimination based on family status, okay? And listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you at all. I put this together so that we could have a real conversation about this. My biggest fear is that the people who are going to be impacted the most through this WFA process are individuals who have such grounds. So I'll give you examples. People who are on maternity leave, people who are taking care of family members, people who have accommodations. Those are the people that the employer will see as, you know, impacting the workplace but not being in the workplace, right? Or costing more to the employer. Because if the employer has to put an accommodation in place, they're looking at this, well, I could have a person without an accommodation, or I could have a person with an accommodation, you know. And let's just be real, they're not sitting there going, oh, well, you know, this person finally has a stable union job and they're the caregiver in the family. And they're not thinking about it in that way, the way we're thinking about it, right? They're thinking about, what do my numbers say? What are the impacts to my budget? You know, can we deliver these services? And it's unfortunate, but I fear, and this is the message I put out across the organization. So the National Labor Relations officers, myself and those on the committee are all keeping an eye on whether or not disproportionately union activists, people with family status situations, or any kind of discriminatory grounds are being disproportionately targeted through the WFA process. So know that we are keeping an eye on this, and that I'm not going to go without a fight. If we see that this is happening, you can expect that I'm going to make a lot of noise about this, and that we will grieve. We will grieve each and every time that we think that somebody's being targeted for these grounds.
Thank you so much, Alisha. La prochaine question en français.
The next question is in French. What is the future for people working from home? Will that situation have an impact on the number of people, of members cut? I would like to say no, but I don't want to lie to you. And what I have to say is that it should not have an impact on jobs. But I do expect, unfortunately, that if an employer is extra vigilant and demands that you be in the office 3 days per week, and maybe it's not because they're evil, maybe they are evil, but at the end of the day, a manager has to respect certain standards. If he can't tell management, I've got 100% attendance of my team, his supervisor could be a person who might think, well, in that case, we don't need that position. So we don't know what happens in the minds of people when they're involved this way. But that is something else that we will keep an eye on. If we see that people who are on telework, who work from home for reasons of accommodation or other, are always the ones cut, or the majority of people cut, we'll issue grievances on that. Because we must continue to defend our rights at work and the rights of people who are in telework. We're in 2025 now. We don't have to be in the office every day. Certain days it makes sense, but other days it's not necessary. So we have to continue to work to be vigilant and to make sure that these are not the first people to be fired. We can see on this question that we're working with many archaic policies. We proved during the pandemic that it was possible to work from home. So to come backwards to these old policies and to not accommodate people who need to work from home for different reasons is absurd. So our next question. In English now?
That the PSCC currently doing to protect members from being impacted by potential WFAs? What steps, if any, can members take to avoid being affected by the WFA?
So in terms of the first question, I mean, you know, the PSAC is always working to strengthen the language in the collective agreement, is constantly working to adjudicate that language, take it to court to make sure that it's been interpreted in a way that we can actually go back and hold the employer accountable. So that fight is always going on. And each round of bargaining, we're trying to strengthen that. Now, in terms of what's happening right now, I can't speak directly to what's happening at the PSAC, but I can tell you what we're doing to protect impacts. One of the things is that we're in the background trying to work on a policy grievance because of the way the process has so far gone with the notice and the timelines with the employers. So we're working to actually hold the employers accountable through the process. Now, in terms of what members can do, and this is going to be sort of the, you know, how do I make myself an individual that, regardless of what role I'm in, the employer is going to see value in my remaining in the workplace? Because that's really what we're talking about, right? And one of the things that I can tell you that I did personally was that I continuously invested in myself, but I negotiated investment from my employer into myself as well. So the unfortunate thing is that, like, when you're at the 9th hour, it's very difficult to now do that investment. But I will say that there was not a period of time in my career where I didn't either ask for permission to, you know, have my work laptop so that I could work on the School of Public Service classes, for example, so that I could take courses in the evening. Now, I was doing that on my own time. Would I have liked the employer to do that for me? Absolutely. And there were times where they agreed to let me do it on work time when my hours would allow or my workload would allow. But that continuous investment in yourself, the other thing is getting acting opportunities or, you know, developing yourself is always a really good way to make yourself a person that, even through cuts, you end up being a person that the organization says, okay, well, we can reskill you into doing something else, right? Or you've already invested in reskilling yourself in something else. So maybe this position is leaving, but now this position is a new opportunity, right? Because that's part of the WFA process, is actually to look at if this position has been surplus, and I'm going to say surplus in a very general sense, this position will no longer exist. Well, this new position may exist. Now, are you skilled to take on this position, right? And so one of the ways that you can best protect yourself in the workplace is continuously evolving yourself in the workplace. And it is, and asking the employer to invest in you, but continuously having that conversation. And we know with the performance appraisals in the federal government, we have the learning plans that we have. And so every year I wanted to demonstrate that, like, I'd taken on learning that was about not just doing the job that I had, but about the job that I was going to have next. And so that was one of the ways that I made myself kind of invaluable. The other thing, and Bernadette will tell you this, is that I read every policy there was. So I was the policy expert. If somebody had a question about the policies, I was their go-to person. And so, but I was never a person who hoarded that knowledge. I didn't weaponize that knowledge. I always made it freely available to people. And so it meant that I worked well with others, even in situations where I didn't agree with the decision that was being made. And so those are some of the things that I think are really important if you want to make yourself sort of, marketable within the workplace and able to move around more easily in the workplace.
These are super great answers, and also even greater questions. And I hope that it speaks to all of you at home, and that you're learning a lot from this conversation. I'm looking at the time, and so I want to make sure we get through as many as possible. So maybe let's go to that next one that speaks on a meeting between the Treasury Board officials and the PACC. So on Thursday, November 7, 2024, very specific, during a meeting between Treasury Board officials and the PACC, the union said it was told the government will be widening the net to reduce its spending, looking to cut term and casual employees, and opening the door for departments to slash permanent employees through layoffs. Has UNE been informed as to how many terms, casual, and permanent employees, and which employer will be affected by these layoffs?
So the data that we do have, that we've been informed of, is that at this time, and I can officially say that we were notified of the 3,300 at IRCC. And that process is underway. I actually have some departments, and I can tell you another one. Wage is another department that is looking at about 125 individuals. What the makeup of that is what we don't have yet. How many of those are casuals, how many are terms, and how many are indeterminate? We do not have the full picture yet on that. So we have not been through that. And the reason why we wouldn't have that is, first we have to identify what services are being reduced, right? And then we look at, okay, how many people who are casual or terms delivering that service? Yeah. And can we have the indeterminate people do it? And then out of that, how many indeterminate people will be reduced? So the process is actually a lot longer than people think. It's like the first thing is notice, right? So if you look at the collective agreement, the first thing is notice. Well, notice is stressful in some ways. Like, it's good, and yet it's a double-edged sword, right? Mm-hmm. Because it brings anxiety. Like, when will I know who? Will I know how many? When will I know which members, which locations, all those kinds of things. And so we do not have, the full picture yet. There are some departments like the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying and FedDev who are not actually doing WFA in this particular round. That does not mean that there are not other departments that have yet to give us notice. And that's because the process to reduce the budget of an organization is actually held under cabinet secret. And so a department would put forward how many, like, they're gonna say, here's what your budget's gonna be, and they're like, how are you gonna make this happen? And then, like, the senior management of that organization would say, well, we have to cut this much in services and this much in staff and this much in spending, And so, there's, and for those who don't know, there's usually, A-based, which is your permanent, and your B-based funding. And those two funding pots don't always meld together. So sometimes the A base, which is like supposed to be their, this is the block of money you get every time you have a fiscal year come, is reduced by 20%. But the B base is not, because there's still programs that we want to deliver. And so there might be terms hired in that B base that are not getting WFA'd because they're attached to a program rather than A-based funding, right? And that money will eventually run out because their terms, and what will happen is their terms will simply not be renewed. And so people sometimes think when they get a term, well, it means I'm eventually going to become indeterminate. That's not necessarily the case, especially when WFAs tend to come around every 11 to 13 years in the federal public service. And in terms of, looking at who's supposed to be cut, one of the things I can tell you is if I was looking at thinking that my job was going to be WFA'd, I'd be writing my MP, I'd be writing my MPP, I'd be writing everybody that I think needs to be worried about the fact that we're going to reduce services to Canadians. And there's a decision on the books that say, the public service, when it carries out its duties, is supposed to be nonpartisan, but we're allowed to be partisan people, right, in our own lives, especially when it impacts our lives and our jobs and our families and people we care about. And so in those situations, we can reach out to people and say, listen, I don't think reduction in services is the right move, and here's why. And I want to know what you're going to do about it. And if you're not, then I'm not going to vote for you.
I think people underestimate the power of writing to our MPs and MPPs. So that is something extremely important, and thank you for reiterating that.
Yeah, no worries.
Absolutely. So here, another question. With the onset of AI in the workplace, what measures are the employer and UNE taking to protect and provide good quality jobs? What percentage of our core task is the employer allowed to replace with AI modeling?
So at this time, we don't actually have any language around this in any of the collective agreements. I did review the bargaining demands, and there were some demands in there around AI. But what I will say is, what measures are the employers? Zero. The employer wants to reduce its costs at all costs, including good unionized jobs. They are not here to maintain your job or keep you in the workplace. What is UNE taking? Obviously a stance on the fact that we think that the government is not very good at implementing electronic programs. I mean, Phoenix, GCMS, it just goes on, the list of programs they have not been able to put in a meaningful way that doesn't actually impact either individual members that work for the public service or services to Canadians. And we really believe that it takes the computing process of a person to actually understand the complexities of the work that we do as a public service for Canadians. And so we'll continue to talk about how important the jobs are, how important these services are, and we'll continue to lobby with MPs, the government, and every level to make sure that AI does not take away all of these jobs and lead us into an unprecedented recession.
Yeah, that's a great question from
Yeah.
Charlotte here, and it's very apropos with like the times in which we live, right, currently.
Yes.
So, Alisha, are you aware of the criteria to lay off people at IRCC, which is immigration, and can such criteria be contested?
So the criteria is the criteria outlined in the WFA booklet that PSAC put in there. There is a link to how the committees are put together and how we go through the process. And as I outlined, it should not be like, I'm looking at Bernadette, I don't like what I see in her work, performance stuff. It should really be, is the position that Bernadette occupies not a service we are going to provide Canadians anymore? how many people like Bernadette across the country are providing that service that we're going to reduce? And that should be happening at each level. And the unfortunate thing is that there seems to be some idea out there that if you get rid of maybe colleagues or people who are not performing well, or you let the boss know who's not coming back from their break, that may then create an opportunity for you to remain in your position. And that is not the case at all. That could be further from the truth. If anything, the union then has to turn around and actually protect that other union member's job, because now it looks like they're being targeted for whatever reason by other members of the same union to be terminated. And so then we come in fight mode to protect that individual's job, because every union member deserves the right to be represented by their union, whether they've done something that is correct or incorrect in the workplace, and then to have the due process take place. I mean, people can't be guilty without going through a process, and so we still have to protect those members.
Thank you so much. And I'm looking, okay, we have 5 minutes left. And I would like to turn to my screen here and maybe take one question at least. So I don't know if someone wanted to ask a question, raise your hand, like your virtual hand, and I will go to you. I don't see it on, I know there's a few pages, and I only see page one.
Come to the first page.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think there's any questions.
There's no questions from home. We're like absorbing and digesting the information that was just shared. Alisha, before we end this, and I'll keep monitoring my screen, do you want to add anything?
Again, I think, there's often this belief that the union is an entity outside of yourself. But the power inside unionism is that you are self-empowered to know when somebody is infringing on your rights, knowing what your rights are, and also lobbying for yourself and your colleagues to maintain their jobs. And I don't expect everybody to be running out to rallies every day, right? That's not what I mean by that. What I mean is sometimes it's the silent victories that we have. It's the quiet, I'm making sure that people know that we're not lazy, that we are working hard. When you're having dinner conversations and people are like, you work you're a public servant, so you have a pension. And it's like, it's making sure that those conversations are not the last word, that the person believes that that's really the case, that we're living a different life. Because I will tell you that most of our members make under $62,000 a year. And in this economy, that just doesn't cut it.
No.
It doesn't cut it for their family, especially if they're the sole breadwinner. It doesn't cut it for society in terms of what they can give back into contributing to, buying and purchasing. Their buying power is being eroded as inflation goes up, as the economy goes down. And we think that for some reason, we're convinced that the solution is paying workers less rather than more and enabling them to participate, right? In society in a meaningful way. We keep wanting to make profit margins more important than actually ensuring that the workers go home and feel like they're making a living wage and that they can support their families. And I think that at the end of the day, that's what's really important, is making sure that people know the work that we do, know the value of the services that we provide to Canadians on a regular basis. And, part of that is continuing to talk about the stories out there of what members do on a daily basis to support Canadians. And I think, that is some of the work that we need to do, is kind of change the reputation of people who serve Canadians. Because I got into this with a deep sense of wanting to do something for my country. That's not everybody's reason. But I also have to feed my family at the same time. And so those two things can't come at each other's expense, right? And I had the privilege of working at Parks. The mandate, fits with my beliefs and the things that I want to do in life. And so I was very fortunate. But that doesn't mean that I should be grateful that I have a job, because they're buying my skills and my abilities and my services. And we have to remember that as workers, that, you know, we're always in an exchange with the employer at all times. And that, you know, we need to make sure that Canadians understand the impacts of reducing jobs and making sure that they know that we're not living large, and that, yes, not all of us are perfect, but we are all here to do a job, right? And support our families.
Absolutely. So being able to work in dignity and then eventually retire in dignity. Alors, merci Alisha.
Thank you so much, Alisha, for that last word, and thank you for taking the time to answer the questions we received. We're getting to the end of this key session, this key exchange. We really want to express our deep gratitude to each and every one of you for being here and for your commitment to the process. And thank you also to everybody who attended this live show, which we can view later. So we also want to deeply thank all those who shared the link to join, and those who asked the questions, and those in the hall who were able to organize these discussions, and those who asked questions to enrich our discussions, our collective discussions. Your participation is very important, and your reality also matters to us all. And if ever you have any more questions after this event, please write to us. We're there for you, and we will continue to help and to guide you to the best of our abilities. Take good care of yourselves, because this is a very turbulent season we're going through. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have further questions. We're here to support you. And maybe, as Alisha said before we disconnect, when we understand the problem and we want to take part in change making, well, participate more in our union. So I will leave you with these words: Ubuntu, I am, because we are together. Thank you, and see you very shortly. Bye.